Hey, YouTube here, going to talk about things going on in the world around us, and it's very frustrating. Last time I spoke, I was talking about how many executive orders that were being presented by the likes of our new king, Biden, and I was only doing that video a week ago, and at the time, he had only had about 15, maybe 17 executive orders. And now it's been not even 2 weeks in office, um, and he has already done 44 executive orders. So, yeah, to say the least, Joe Biden is an out of control monarch. He himself once stated, actually, not even that. I say once. It was in October of 2020 during the election cycle. He said, there are certain things you can't do by executive order unless you're a dictator. We're in a democracy. We need a consensus. Well, that's a bold statement for someone who has already done 44 executive orders in less than 2 weeks. But I'm not here to talk about Joe Biden. In some ways, I'm here to talk about Joe Biden, but more importantly, I'm here to talk about the most insane bill I have ever seen in terms of constitutional overreach presented. H.R. 127, gun control bill, as stated by the, let's see if I could find it, by a spokesperson from the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. He called this bill insanity on steroids. And he further explains, we've seen some astonishingly bad legislation originate on Capitol Hill, but this one takes the term abomination to an entirely new level. You look at this bill and you wonder whether Congressman Jackson Lee, that's Sheila Jackson Lee, ever heard of the Bill of Rights, especially the Second Amendment. So, insanity on steroids is the big tagline that's going around the internet right now, and some people think it's exaggeration. No, it's still an understatement, because what this bill is doing is a lot. Let me just go into a little backstory before this bill. Sheila Jackson Lee oversees the 18th Congressional District of Texas. And what happened in her congressional district in May of 2018 was there was this terrible mass shooting that happened at Santa Fe High School, where 3 people died, 2 of which were faculty and teachers, but one of which was a foreign exchange student from Pakistan. And it's a really tragic story of a girl who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. But what happened at the shooting was there was a student who just got really angry and just flipped out and just started shooting at everyone. I'm gonna turn off the light here, see what happens to our lighting, because I keep seeing the camera do this. So it's really a sad story, but again, this happened in May of 2018. And now this bill by Sheila Jackson Lee is being presented 3 years later, almost 3 years later, and it's 19 pages. So one quick note on the length of the bill. You're saying within a few months, the Democrats were able to come up with an omnibus bill that's 5,500, almost 6,000 pages long. But it took Sheila Jackson Lee 3 years almost to write a 19-page bill. And in this 19-page bill, it lists an insane rewriting of any legal anything that exists with gun ownership. Let me just highlight some of the scariest parts of the bill. According to the bill, the oversight of the potential law's future implementation would go to the ATF. That's an agency that has been overseeing all gun laws and has been policing gun shops like in California and New York to make sure they dot the T's and cross the I's. But what it's going to require is if this bill passes, you have 3 months to report whatever guns you own, and included in that, you would have to include the serial numbers, and worse than even just reporting, it goes to a public database. So basically, if you're a gun owner, you're now going to be treated the same as a sex offender. And in order to maintain gun ownership, you'll have to spend a licensing fee every couple years, I believe. Every couple years, when it's time to renew your license, you have to do an 8-hour class. Now they're going to raise the federal gun ownership age to 21. How about that? You can be 4 years old and decide what gender you are, but you have to be 21 years old to own a gun now in every state if this law passes. So that's already 3 out of the gate. Like, what the F? This is insane. It gets much worse. On top of having to take classes, having to have licenses with fees, you will also have to take, oh no, you also have to pay for insurance for guns, so no different than car ownership, but there's no set price for this insurance. Imagine it could be through the roof, and would it be per gun? I mean, car, it's per car if you own a car. And here's where we get into really, really, really scary territory. If you have the wrong guns, so if you have a gun that's on a list that they no longer accept, which is funny note on the bill, they say the Colt AR-15, but so what, the AR-15, the Armalite AR-15, the Armalite is okay. But if you have a gun that is no longer acceptable on their list and you don't turn it in, you can go to jail for as long as 10 years, and you'd have to pay a fine for as much as between $50,000 and $20,000, or $50,000 and $100,000. Yeah, you heard that. You heard that right? So now, sweeping across the nation, you'll need to pass a test of 8-hour course, have insurance, have a licensing fee, to be 21, and you can't own certain guns now. Taking away 50 BMG. Semi-automatic shotguns are going to be gone. But the slipperiest slope, I forgot to mention this now, every gun owner would be required to pass a psychological evaluation. So if you don't pass their psychological evaluation, someone's going to be knocking at your door with a set of handcuffs waiting for you, unless you give them their guns. This is entirely happening at a time when the left is taking some insane measures to seize power. And let me just list a couple of them. Joe Biden is currently the president, and he seized power in an election that was very suspicious in this important sense, that he's a man who, for his entire campaign, never spoke to more than a couple hundred people, maybe by chance of COVID, but even in his live streams, he never had more than a couple thousand people. And he beat the guy who had crowds of tens of thousands every time he spoke. So that was already suspicious. But worse yet, because of a protest with tens of thousands of people, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, but the violence that occurred trickled down to a couple hundred agitators who were very angry, of course, understandably so, with the shadiness. And it led to the death of 5 people because it was a riot that occurred because of the amount of anger that was happening. Of course, this riot was entirely blamed on Trump for him inciting violence, for saying stand up for America, and people took that with how they wanted. So I'm just saying this happened, and after this happened, now conservative speech almost entirely banned off social media, as well as certain people who aren't even conservative being banned from social media. Tim Pool, who's a leftist activist, he's becoming more and more right, but his roots are in the left. Banned from social media. Ron Paul, the most peaceful politician in the history of Congress, banned from Facebook. The Socialist Workers Union in the UK banned off of Facebook. So now what you're seeing is the big tech work as a proxy for the censorship of people in substitution of the government acting, because the government knows they can't get away with infringement of the First Amendment, because that's something their own base wouldn't allow to happen, considering what has been happening in Portland and Seattle for the past 6 months. So all that is happening. Meanwhile, because of what happened on January 6th, a giant barbed wire fence has been built around Washington, D.C., and tens of thousands of National Guard troops still are sleeping in the parking garage. Well, not tens of thousands. At one point, it was over 10,000. Now it's probably less. But our National Guard troops have been kidnapped by the likes of this new administration to protect not the American people, but our representatives. And they're a big, happy Capitol Hill to present atrocious bills like this that say average American person, 48% of the American people own guns. You're going to say, if you don't put yourself on the sex offender like registry, we're going to come and arrest you and fine you between $50,000 and $100,000. So again, back to Trump. The left spent 4 years saying Trump is a Nazi. Now they are acting like Nazis. They built up a giant barbed wire fence around the Capitol building and the White House. They aren't allowing anyone outside of DC, and there are still businesses that are shut down inside DC because they can't operate within the walls. And you have, again, a Congress who is having no fear in presenting draconian bills like this. Aside of this, Jackson Lee, the woman who presented this bill in January, presented a bill pursuing the funding of research for the reparations of Black people. So that's also a radical bill that would never have passed prior to the new administration being currently in place. It's not passing, but here's the shady part. Mitch McConnell is trying to signal unity by supporting the bill. The Democrats are perhaps misreading McConnell's signaling of sort of support of that bill by going and doubling down and going even further into radicalization. But here's my theory. My theory on why the left thinks they can present such bills unopposed. One is obviously they're protected by a giant barbed wire fence from any sort of resistance by the American people. But also I think that they know they can get away with it because they have these past few months. I mentioned earlier the omnibus bill that's 55 to 6,000 pages long, which was written in a few months, which sent $800 billion overseas and only gave the American people $200 billion. That's the $600 that Mitch McConnell also overrode Donald Trump's veto and said, American people, you guys don't need $2,000. You're going to put up with $600 and you're going to like it. Yeah, the American people weren't very happy about that. But what did we do about it? Maybe had a Capitol riot, which was of conservatives, by the way, which were people orderly walking through the Capitol building within the stanchions. And someone stole a laptop. People put their feet on Nancy Pelosi's desk. People trashed some rooms, maybe stole a podium. Of course, 4 officers died and 1 patriot was shot. But the result of this was the FBI leaving, as they stated, no stone unturned by going after everyone on any bit of security camera footage or social media posted anything. Anyone inside the Capitol building is now seeing the book thrown at them by the FBI. Brandon Straka, by perfect example, never set foot, at least there's no evidence of him ever stepping foot inside the Capitol building, is currently rotting in federal prison because he was part of the group that clashed with police at the front door of the Capitol building. This is hypocritical, of course, because the FBI is giving different treatment to people who carry a different philosophy. Again, Brandon Straka, if you don't know the name, is the guy who started the Walkaway campaign, who organized protests in opposition to the left. One other such person who was arrested by the FBI was John Sullivan, who was an organizer for the left for protests. He organizes Black Lives Matter protests and coordinated with Antifa and organized a protest in Provo, Utah, where 1 person was shot, a motorist who was simply driving through or past the group of protesters. Yeah, so again, this guy, John Sullivan, who was also arrested by the FBI, was not only inside the Capitol building, but he was the person who shot the footage of the patriot from San Diego who got shot. He was literally within inches of entering the Senate floor. It was only the Secret Service that stopped him. And outside of that, Sullivan is also quoted as saying, F yeah, let's burn this effer down to Capitol building. So he actually has on camera saying, let's incite more violence, encourage violence. But of course, again, he is on the left, and so now he has been set free without bail. Why? Because he's on the left. So the FBI has been operating in almost a Gestapo-like fashion by going after anyone who didn't set foot in the Capitol building that day because some violence occurred. Newsmax, Greg Abbott, I think his name is, said in one of his newscasts, this would be like Antifa being hunted by the FBI, and anyone who is within 100 feet of a building being burned down is now complicit in that building being burned down. It's kind of an insane breach of enforcement tactic, an insane breach of government overreach. Insane government overreach is what I'm trying to say. So all this is happening. Meanwhile, this now bill of guns are going to be effectively outlawed being presented. Because who's to say what doctors are going to allow people to be considered mentally fit enough? Is it going to be like COVID 19, where there would be some financial incentive for doctors to include the COVID 19 death as counting as a COVID 19 death, even if it was from a completely different reason, like a motorcycle accident? We all saw what a mess that was, but now we have this major potential dagger into the heart of the Second Amendment on the horizon. And the American people, it's going to be the line in the sand for some states. Texas, for sure, they're going to secede if that happens. But it's not going to go quietly, I think. In closing for me on this, it is very sad what happened in Santa Fe, Texas, and Santa Fe, Texas high school to the Palestinian, is that Palestinian? No, Pakistani foreign exchange student. It is terrible what happened to her and the 13 other people who were wounded in that shooting, as well as the 2 other teachers who died being shot. But a solution to preventing this type of violence isn't more violence. It isn't threatening the arrest of 48% of the American people. There's other things you can do to help prevent that violence, not take such extreme measures. And I hope the American people does stand up for this. In order, if you are interested in not putting up with it, you could look up the contact information for your maybe sheriff in your area to see what he would do about it. Law enforcement in your area to see what they would do about it. Maybe your own representative if you live in a conservative enough area to see what they would do about it. Unfortunately, I'm in an area that isn't very conservative in terms of its representative leadership. So I do think that any sort of voice of concern in that regard would fall on deaf ears. But it's time to start governing from the bottom up. Right now, we are in a very dictatorial state in the United States, and we have to push back in order to prevent some of the violence that occurred after the likes of, for example, World War II Germany happened. Well, once those guns were taken in 1938 from the Jewish people, within a year they were being whisked away into concentration camps, often suffer the likes of the German Holocaust of the Jewish people, as well as gypsies and blacks and gays. It was not pretty what happened in Germany, and it happened again with Chairman Mao in China, and it happened again with Pol Pot, and it happened with the Soviet Union in the 50s and 60s, and it could happen here if we are not careful. And we have been very careless in terms of standing up for ourselves, conservatives, and we have been very patient, but let's make this message clear. Let's be careful. If you do want to call law enforcement, be careful with your language. And if you want to be extra careful, use an encrypted phone number. If you want to email someone, use an encrypted email. Maybe gather together, try and get a hold of a political action committee, help empower organizations like the NRA, or as I stated earlier with a quote, let me find it. The quote, which was, oh my gosh, insanity on steroids, which was stated by a spokesman from the Citizens Committee for the Far Right to, sorry, it's a bit of a Freudian slip, but a spokesman from the Citizens Committee for the Right to Keep and Bear Arms. Get a hold of those people. Make your voice heard, amplify their voice. Last, very last bit. If you haven't yet, check out my new website in the description below, and also I will leave a description for the article I've written about this very same subject. I will keep you guys in the loop with certain things like this. In the meantime, I'll catch you guys later.